Hey, welcome to our Victory at Home interviews. We're so excited that you've joined us for one of these, and we'd encourage you to check them all out. And we're trusting that as you watch this and learn from our guests, that there will be at least one nugget of gold that is super helpful and impactful for you and your home to help you thrive. Hey, so here we are again with Sheldon and Valerie Dean, and super excited to have you guys again from Family Life Canada. And you guys actually live in Regina, pretty close to Moose Jaw. So fun to have you close enough to be able to actually have you in person, right? Which these days is a rarity because of COVID.
It's so fun.
So yeah, it is fun. So we're going to talk now a little bit about marriage. Marriage ministry is kind of the focus of your ministry and family life, although you do parenting stuff as well.
That's right.
And so anyway, we're doing, as a church, we're doing this thing called victoryathome.ca, and these videos will be a part of that. So tell us a little bit about, if you were going in to help couples with marriages, what are some of the areas that you would want to hit on and connect with couples about? And then we can work our way into those and chat about them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure. I think one of the first things that we love doing is just hearing their story, though, too, right?
Yeah.
Like where are, like, kind of how'd you, like, just to get to know people, kind of get to know how they, who they are, walk with them through that. But then we really like to kind of start narrowing and making our way through some of the more interesting conversations or pulling information out. And it really seems to be, there's kind of these like two kind of big macro issues that really, when we boil it down or pull things apart, they're kind of surfacing around either differences, and so like the differences that couples have in their marriage, or drift. Like couples have just drifted apart, and we've experienced both those things. We've had to learn about our differences, and it's from our differences that we also experience drift, and then just how to bring those back together.
Yeah. How to manage them well.
Yeah, because it's interesting with differences, and maybe we can dive into that one first and unpack that a little bit, though. But with differences, it seems to be, there's this kind of a spike in divorce for first 4 years, for like 5 to 7 years kind of thing. And when you kind of look at it, a lot of it actually boils down to differences. And couples are different, Valerie and I are different, and we don't understand the differences, or we don't know what to do with the differences. And
Often we're not prepared.
Not prepared.
Because in the honeymoon or that new beginning, right, you've got the rose-colored glasses, you think that they're perfect, right?
Well, you are perfect.
Oh, right. But eventually, you realize they're not perfect.
I still think you're perfect. I just got to keep saying that. Like the camera's on, and so I have to.
Say it, and you'll believe it.
Yeah.
I hope that's healthy.
Yeah, and so then there's this spike because of the differences, because this is like you're the problem, and rather than
Okay, and so people feel disappointed.
Yeah.
Right? You're married, you're excited, married life is going to be the greatest. This is all so good. And then somewhere along the way, whether that's 2 years or 4 years or 6 years in, but somewhere along the way you wake up and you're like, this is not what I got into this.
Yeah, and often we're not prepared for that. We're not prepared to deal with it, to appreciate it. It's just causing us stress because they're doing things so differently than we would, or they're thinking differently than we would. And then in a way to try to manage that stress, we try to change them, or we try to push them away, or find a way that those differences aren't affecting us so much. Yeah.
versus trying to learn how to appreciate them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So interesting, we started out by saying we'll learn a couple's story, right? As we're going to help them. So every story is different, right? Sure. Every couple has got, this story, that story. And I think when couples often are thinking about their marriage challenges, they'll say, yeah, but you don't know our story. Right. Or, but our situation, but this is our challenge. Yeah. But what you guys are finding in your ministry is that, yes, every story is different, and we got to acknowledge that. And yet, most couples deal with some of these same issues. And every couple, I know my wife and I, we'd say, yep, we're different. And that creates challenges, right? It's not easy to deal with the differences.
Right.
So how do you do it? How do you deal with maybe first of all, what are some of the differences? so that you can recognize them, because sometimes you're just feeling it and you're not able to name it. So maybe let's go there, and then we'll talk about some of the ways we can deal with that reality.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously gender differences, right? Men and women are different. Yeah. So we don't want to make a huge deal out of that, but there are some differences. There's family dynamics, from the home that you grew up in. Right. You kind of bring some of those expectations or those patterns, right, that you saw growing up.
Totally. You're like, we do it this way. No, we do it that way.
Just unpack Christmas for a second. Right? Right? You're laughing. So obviously we know that
there's never been a marriage fight over Christmas, right? No.
But it's interesting because here's, right? So let's say, thankfully, I think we were both kind of early morning, like open your presents on Christmas morning or the day that you wake up to celebrate the Christmas.
My family didn't have like a set thing.
Yeah. But like there will be families where it's just like, no, you open them on Christmas Eve. Right. That is what you do. And then you sleep in on Christmas morning. And then where the other spouse will be like, oh, no. Like you get up at like 4 a.m., your pots and pans banging, like make a big deal, get everyone up. And so that's a difference, right? That we may not even really kind of know until we're like in the marriage and trying to deal with it. But here's why this is actually such an issue, or such maybe issues. Here's the thing that's going on under the surface there, is if Valerie was let's just pretend Valerie's a Christmas Eve and I'm a Christmas morning. When I'm saying no to her, I'm actually saying like your childhood memories are wrong. And my childhood memories are more important, right? And so we're going to do it my way, or vice versa. And then usually we only talk about Christmas when? At Christmas, right? Where the emotion's already charged.
Right when you're,
we're stressed over getting gifts. It's just a busy time of year. Whereas it's actually really healthy to talk about Christmas in like June or July. Sure. You're not charged, right? There's no emotion behind it. And now we can be like, so why is Christmas Eve so important to you? Oh, it's because this. Oh, I never realized that it has attached all these family memories. So that's kind of one of those family dynamics.
A lot of those family of origin differences or upbringing differences, you stumble upon them in the moment. Yeah. And then a lot of times that's emotions are charged, right? So somehow learning, is that one of the ways you deal with it, is like talking about them away from the
having that conversation away from the moment, right? Yeah. Now there are going to be times though where we're going to have to deal with things in the moment, so we're also going to have to learn how to have healthy conflict. There is such a thing as healthy conflict, right? And a lot of it is like just different another big difference would be communication styles. Sure. Valerie and I communicate very, very I'm high verbal. Valerie's a low verbal person. That's played its way out. I'm an external processor, so I'm somebody who I need to actually say the words to actually know what I'm thinking. And Valerie's an internal processor. And so this is what would happen. We'd get into, I like to call them a discussion. That's just a fun word for an argument, right? I think it's a safer word. But we would get into a discussion. And so I'm external processing. And I'm using all these words because I'm a high verbal, right? And so Valerie's trying to internally process everything I'm saying. And I'm done talking, so I stop.
For about 2 seconds.
Well, yeah. I was going to say like 3 seconds, but maybe it's only 2 seconds. But
so it might feel like 2 to her, and it might feel like an eternity to you when you stop.
I got to keep talking. But here's the thing. Obviously, she didn't understand what I just said, so I got to say it louder, and I got to repeat it again and use more words. Yeah. Which then
I'm like, it's information overload. Like, just let me process what you've said and be able to articulate what it is that I'm thinking and feeling.
And so, in that situation, what we have learned is Valerie will just say to me, "Okay, Sheldon, I'm processing." So now what that does to me is it decreases my stress. I know she's heard me. I know she's going to respond. And I know it's now time for me to stop sharing my words and allow her to think that.
Okay, so you guys, by being aware of that difference, you're and verbalizing it, I guess, which you have to sort of make yourself do, right? But you get there. Then you're able to sort of connect better and deal with that argument, that discussion argument.
Discussion.
Yeah, okay.
So those would be some of the communication differences that we've had to play through.
Yeah, but there's lots of differences. There's cultural.
Right.
There is, what else? Help me out. What are some other
I think we listed a few of them. I think a lot of them just come into so within the family dynamics, there's all these different differences, right? And so within communication, there's a list of like external, internal, high verbal, low verbal, direct, indirect, facts or feelings. So how do you communicate, right? And so I think there's only maybe a few of the like high level ones, but then underneath each, right? Family dynamics. So we only gave you the Christmas example, right? But there's multiple examples, and
How you fold the towels to how you raise the kids. I mean, it's like everything, right?
How you handle conflict, right?
Right.
Yeah, all those things.
Are you a spender or a saver? That's a difference, right? That's a little different than origin family, but
yeah, but you know what? That's an interesting point to make is the finance piece, because a lot of times couples will want to talk about that. And here's what we have found. When they're actually arguing about finances, actually this is what we find a lot of times, right? So we actually want to argue about like the symptom. And so the symptom here is maybe, well, I'm a spender, okay? Valerie's a saver.
I'm a saver.
Yeah, and so like literally we are opposite. We have all the, like we get to practice on all these differences because we have them all. But like here's what actually is going on. So I'll call myself a spender and Valerie a saver, but it's actually the value that I place on money. Right? And so as a spender, I used to, this is kind of before my like coming to Christ fully and surrender everything, but I used to place so much of my value in the things I owned. And so as a spender, I need to have the newest vehicles, I need to have the best toys, I need to be spending, because actually the value I place on that means status to me. So money means status to me. Whereas for Valerie, it was why she is security, why she's a saver. And so it's actually, we're arguing over money, but it's actually the value that we had placed on it.
So a lot of times for couples, the issue isn't the issue. And there's an issue beneath the issue.
Yeah, and then let's talk about the thing beneath it, because that's actually the root cause of what's coming out of.
And then maybe, would you say if you could understand that in each other, you'll have more empathy or a better ability to sort of work together on things, where instead of fighting over this, you understand each other at a deeper level. And
you learn to appreciate.
Yeah, well, and then when you have that understanding, you can kind of stop trying to make the other person hear what you're saying or understand where you're coming from, because you already know that. So it's like, okay, we know where we're coming from, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to navigate this together as a team instead of seeing each other as enemies, right? And trying to win, right? We have that win-lose mentality of it. One of us has to win, one has to lose. It's like, no, if we can come around, work as a team, and come to a solution where we're both winning, that's where we're going to find just a lot of peace and success.
love it. And that's when you guys do the seminars, that's the same side of the table thing, right? Do you do the table piece? That's such a great illustration where you're on opposite sides of the table arguing over something versus coming to the same side of the table. You're looking at the same stuff, but you're looking at it together. And so here's one of the things I find, okay, in marriage in particular. Our differences, we tend to polarize. Do you know what I mean by that? So it's like I'm a little different than my wife on this or that, but then because I see that she's different, I get more different. I pull even further in that direction, and sometimes I think she might do the same. I mean, I wouldn't, be totally sure of that. So is there something I can do about that? Or maybe that's good. Maybe we're balancing each other out. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, could you give us an example of something?
Well, like spender and saver. Okay. So, maybe like I'm the spender. See, we could be buds, man. Yeah, go blow some cash and have some fun.
Whose cash are we spending?
So, and my wife's more the saver, right? So then maybe we're talking about whatever, buying groceries or something. But then because I wanted to maybe convince her or help her improve, I might go even more towards spending than I normally would. And maybe because I'm already sort of relaxed because I know she's going to pull this way. And then she might even be more of a saver than she normally would because she knows, wow, and it might be sparking off some of those things underneath, right? That security thing in her or whatever. So, yeah. Anyway, I just find they polarize sometimes. We pull further and further apart in our differences.
And I think sometimes what we're doing there is we're we do that because we don't feel like the other person gets it, right? And so then we have to kind of, what Sheldon was saying, we have to do it louder and more. So, because we're trying to be understood, right? We're trying to have our point of view or our feelings or whatever it is validated. And so that's where the understanding piece is so helpful, because if you can understand where each other's coming from, then you can actually talk about the issue, not the symptom, right?
Well, I think where it comes out of that actually is learning then how to, so it's one thing to see this and to know it, right? And then like, why are we doing this? It's who's going to be that first one to be like, well, help me understand why this is so important for you not to buy this. Or for, if this is a spending thing, for, to ask the other person to be like, help me understand like why you want to buy this, like why you need Lay's bag of chips over no name bag of chips. It's like, well, actually, because we've tried the no name and I really just don't like them. Oh, so it's actually not a money thing. It's a flavor thing.
Sure.
Yeah, like it's not about I need to spend more. It's like, if I'm going to buy a bag of chips, and if I'm going to put that into
Those calories got to count.
If I'm putting the unhealthy calories, I want it to make a difference. Like, I want it to taste good while I'm doing it, right? And now we're coming to around that table, understanding and learning healthy strategies on how to ask clarifying questions or probing questions to get to it, versus the like locking in and like, no, I need to pull here, so I'm just gonna fight harder about spending more and
So somebody's got to hit pause and say, let's understand each other. And rather than they don't get me, right? And so I'm going to try to be louder to get my point across. Like, just thinking about this, I think this happens with the COVID-19 thing right now, with other issues where there's polarization in our culture politically. So if we don't understand the person on the other side of whatever fence we're drawing a line on, then we feel like, I just got to shout louder, right? I just got to be more entrenched in my position, because maybe that'll help convince them. But chances are it's going to do the opposite, right? It'll actually probably make them just think, wow, this person's a little, taking this too far.
Or it drives them to be louder as well. Or like, right? Or you're trying to convince me I'm wrong, which, let's face it, none of us like to have to admit that, like in a healthy situation, right? Like, and so even the example that you've given with the COVID thing, it turns into, rather than understanding and hearing the person, it's I have to prove them right, and that's where Valerie was going back.
I have to make you think the same way I do.
Sorry, yeah, great point. And so then that's tying it back into the win-lose versus win-win. And I'll tell you, in a marriage, it's either win-win or win-lose. Like there is no
lose-lose.
Or lose-lose. Sorry. Yeah, there is no win-lose. I'm not sure. Like, let me just clarify. There is no win-lose. It's either you both lose or you both win.
Because you're one. Right?
So as soon as you start thinking win-lose, you have to just say like, wow, self, I'm actually going lose-lose here, right? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because if we're thinking win-lose, how are we living out Philippians 2 verse 3-4, which is talks about putting others before ourselves and living with humility, putting the other interests above our own, those types of things, right? In a win-lose situation, that's not taking place. And so we can get our point across, we can have a healthy conversation, we can, for lack of a better term, now this isn't about winning an argument, but we can come to a healthy place with a win-win in a healthy dynamic, and having a healthy discussion about a specific situation. And it's getting down to the values and the whys and the understanding. And
so a couple comes to you guys and says, that's awesome. A couple comes to you guys and says, we're just not compatible. We are too different. Right? We can't make this work. What should they do?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is something that Gary Thomas says, and he says a lot of couples think they suffer from incompatibility, but really they suffer from a lack of purpose. And so that's what he says, and he says, like, sometimes we're so busy pursuing our own happiness, pursuing our own desires, all those other things. And he says, no, if we can step aside and say, no, what did God make me for? What's my purpose in life? And if we can focus on that and bringing God glory, how do I bring God glory as a wife? How do I bring God glory as a husband, right? And refocusing on how do I love my spouse well, and just changing that paradigm a little bit, because happiness is actually the byproduct, right? If you're trying to get happiness from your spouse, you're not going to do it, right? And so it's a byproduct of living God's way and doing marriage God's way. You do get happiness, but that can't be what you're aiming at, if that makes sense.
So maybe even pursuing compatibility, quote unquote, as some is not really the right thing to pursue, right? And it's probably something you'll never quite grasp if you chase it. But if you pursue purpose together, right? Then you'll find a way to work together, to be a team, like you guys are saying along the way.
And it's interesting because the people who are really different, like Sheldon and I are really different, but you know what? We make a great team because we're more well-rounded.
Sure.
We each brings different, unique strengths and abilities. Yes.
That this is a strength, right? Like,
yeah, because sometimes it's like, oh, it's so different. But it's being like, no, God's made him that way with his unique abilities. I need to appreciate that and draw upon that because I don't have that.
Yeah. It's okay that he's loud and noisy and likes to dance around the home and sing, right? And I just want quiet. But that's okay that
I'd be boring by myself.
But that's a major paradigm shift. To go from you're different and that drives me crazy and makes me mad and I can't stand it and we obviously can't work together, to you're different and that's a blessing to me, that helps me and I'm going to help you, and we're different and that's good versus we're different and that's terrible. And sometimes that's a hard shift to make in the moment, right? Because you feel the frustrations and whatever else. But that paradigm change from opposite sides of the table to same sides of the table, or against each other to being a team.
Yeah, and it really comes from the understanding piece, right? Like, you got to understand the differences and what they are, name them, acknowledge that we're different, and that's okay. It's interesting because for a lot of people, as we begin to know the person, it's those differences that actually draw us to that person.
Initially.
Right? Initially, it's the differences that I'm
so fascinating.
yeah, Valerie lets me speak all the time. This is awesome. And then we get married, I'm like, why won't she speak? Because I'm not.
Oh, it's too much.
Yeah, because I'm not giving her the airtime, right? And then so now we're married and the years go by and it's these differences. But it was those differences that can sometimes draw us together. And then in marriage, the differences drive us apart. And so
but we did have to learn how to manage them, right? You had to learn how to dial it down. If we're talking about the high verbal, low verbal, I had to learn to dial it up. And so we had to find a middle ground where we can both flourish, I guess is the right word, where it's more balanced.
I can't dance around the house at midnight. Valerie's trying to sleep. But noon, good to go, right? Okay. So
you learned your boundaries. Yeah, I love it. So we're learning, we are learning how to manage them, but before we can learn how to manage them, we're going to understand them, right? And even probably before we're going to understand them, we're going to have to really work on that paradigm. We're on the same side together. We're not against each other, right? And if we do all of those things, then those differences that oftentimes attract to start, then cause us to divide a few years in, or a few months, sometimes a few years in, right? They start to divide us. They can actually, again, bring us closer together.
For sure.
Okay, cool. So the differences is one. What's another issue that tends to cause marriages to struggle?
Yeah, so early on, as we said, we kind of have those differences that we unpacked a little bit. And then later on in the years of marriage, what tends to happen, and Valerie alluded to this a little bit too, is if we're pursuing our own happiness or we're pursuing our own things, we tend to drift. Right? We just tend to drift. Maybe it's the differences that we don't understand, or the differences drive us crazy enough that we stop investing in or working or pull away, right? And as we pull away in one area, we may start pulling away in another area. We may start pulling away in another area. My spouse is pulling away. I'm going to start pulling away. I'm going to pursue this, or I'm going to pursue that. And then you just, over time, you drift apart. And that's part of our journey, where I even woke how did I even get here? Like, what is going on in my life? Like, I've drifted so much because I'd put so many things in front of Valerie. I'd put so many things in front of our marriage, in front of our family, pursuing after other things that I thought were going to bring me joy. And so in that, we just drifted apart. And so that's another thing that we see a lot of times. So early on in marriage, you have the differences, and through the later years of marriage, you start to see the drift. The couples have just drifted apart, where they'll be like, we're still friends, or we don't hate each other, like we just feel like roommates. And that kind of language, like you can tell there's drift that's taken place in the relationship.
One of the things about drift is most of the time you don't know what happened, right? If you ever, go to a beach and goof off in the ocean a little bit, and then you look back and you're like, what? How'd I end up here, right? Well, that's that drift, right? Or I used to love canoeing back in the day, and you'd stop paddling for a little bit and just chill and relax a little bit, and then you look at the shoreline and you're like, how did I end up here? Yeah. But drifting is going on all the time. Right. It's just that we're not often aware of that taking place, right? So.
Drift. It's one of those things though that when you don't do anything, like that's when like can cause the drift too, right? Like it just it's happening.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think the first thing is be intentional, right? Like you have to invest in your marriage. You have to invest in your friendship, which it takes time and it takes money sometimes, right? Like not tons, but to go on a date, well, there's a cost to that, time and money, but it's an investment worth making. But again, for some, that's a paradigm shift, right? Because we're so busy and we're often spending our time doing really good things, right? Like if the kids are in sports, or we're serving in church, or on some committees, or in school, or like all these things we can do, they're often good things. Sure. But if we're leaving no room for our spouse, no room for our marriage and our relationship, we will drift because we're just going in different directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of those dates, like as Valerie just said, some of it costs money. Other, pop a bowl of popcorn and go to your bedroom, close. Our kids are older, so there's a rule in our house that when our bedroom door is closed, unless someone is like bleeding profusely, don't knock, right? Now our kids are older, so like we can do that. But we've also established that as a family that said like, okay, you know what? This is important. And actually, when our kids see us taking time for each other, it actually brings security to our kids, and they're like, wow, Mom, and we're also modeling it, right? So we have a son and two daughters. I'm modeling what it means to cherish their mother, what it means to put this relationship first, and I'm showing them that even with a date at home, even by saying, sorry guys, Mom and we're gonna go watch a movie, or we're gonna go have a conversation, and you guys just need to go entertain yourselves for some time being, because we're stepping away. That's also another paradigm shift, because some couples are like, oh, I could never, like my kids need to know that. It's like it actually brings health and security to our kids when they see us investing. And now we even have our kids kicking us out of the house to go have a date. So they've really caught on to, I'm not sure why they're wanting to do that. We'll maybe have to do some digging.
But that is an amazing thing, right? That our kids actually gain security by seeing a healthy marriage, which in the moment they might not like, right? So in the moment they might be like, I want your attention, I want what I want, and I want it now, right? Which is the human, tendency. But I know when our kids were little, my wife and I had a thing we called couch time, right? And it was actually with the kids in the room. But we would be like, kids, you may not talk to, you may not, take attention from us right now because we're doing couch time, and then we would connect with each other and chat about our day or whatever. But it was intentionally to let our kids know you're not the most important thing in the room. Right. And that is a hard shift for parents, right? To say actually each other, our marriage comes first, and to a kid creates all kinds of like insecurities and craziness, but it actually is going to give them security. Yeah. It actually is going to give them that sense of, wow, I'm in a home where there is love and where there is that marriage is important and so on. So fascinating.
When you guys did that, how did your kids handle it?
Yeah, and 90% of the time they loved it. 10% they would, look for that attention during that. But, today they're older, and you know, they would all say so thankful, right? That they had that. There's a story I heard years ago, again in a marriage thing, and it was about a child who was waking up in the night and going into their parents' bedroom and just doing this over and over again. And the parents were trying all these different strategies to get their kid to sleep. And they were going to counseling and getting this help and so on. And finally the counselor said, well, when does your kid ever see you guys together? And they just paused. It was like a light went on. They were like, never. We're never together. Like, they get up in the morning, they go about their day, and they're just, and the counselor said, well, just try this. Try every day spending some time together in front of your child. And they did that, and sure enough, that was what the child was, you know, looking for in their maybe subconscious or whatever. But the kid would just come into the bedroom and just, you know, want to see their parents together, right? Yeah,
we heard another study that is a wonderful story and such, and it's so much truth behind that story of what kids are looking for. And we heard another story that or a study, and they were talking about how kids, it was about age 7 to like 10, they just worry that their kids are going to, or their parents, not their kids, that their parents are going to get divorced. Yeah. Even in a healthy relationship, they're just like, well, everyone's doing it, like, or it's a prominent thing, or this friend's parents got divorced and this friend, and like, oh man, where are my parents at? And so if they don't see us like modeling what a healthy relationship looks like, so just consciously, and that's kind of one of those other like, there's cultural things that are going on that's affecting marriage today, and that can lead to and so one of those cultural things is what's happening around, and our kids are seeing their friends' families are being just broken up by divorce, and so they're like, well, I wonder, even though, you know, things may be really healthy at home, they may just be thinking like, when is it my parents' turn? And so modeling that on a consistent basis, they're going to know, okay, my parents are healthy, and such a great thing. That's a great thing.
So, yeah, well, I tell you, that story just for whatever reason stuck. You know, certain stories, they just stay with you, right? So we got to be intentional about our marriages. What are some ways we can do that? I think you guys mentioned dating, so that's one. Is there other things we can do just to be intentional about married life?
And with that dating, like, just to throw it on the calendar, like, schedule it. So here's the thing, right? Like, it's just like, well, Sheldon loves me. I'm speaking as I'm Valerie here. Not that I'm telling myself I love myself, but right? And so he's like, well, he should just want to obviously just swoop me off my feet and take me on surprise dates all the time. And yeah. And we have found that, man, if we don't schedule it, we don't do it. Yeah. But here's what we found when we scheduled it, is we keep it. And then, you know, depending on what time it is, like if it's a lunch date, and you know, when I used to work at SAS Power, I just wouldn't book a lunch meeting. Why? Because I have a date, I have a meeting. Yeah. Or if now that we're in ministry and we'll meet with couples in the evening, there is no clock in ministry sometimes, right? And so you have to carve out those times, and we will put that on and then we won't move it. Because it's set, and so then we can look forward to it. So yeah, be intentional by dating and make it a priority.
Yeah. And I think control the things you can, right? We can control our busyness, right? Like, we have the option to say yes or no to a lot of things. Some things we don't, right? Their work and whatnot. But control the things that we can and be intentional. I think that's a huge thing. Sometimes we just feel like life is so busy and it's just pulling us along. Yeah. But if we take a step back, we can realize or maybe evaluate some things that, you know what, maybe this isn't the top priority right now, and I need to let that go so I can invest in my marriage and in my kids or whatever it is. Yeah.
I love that. We don't have to just be victims, right, of the busyness of life or all those different things. You can look at them, take a second look at them and say, is this actually something I have to do? Is this actually a priority? Where would I put this in comparison with my marriage? Yeah. And then, make some of those hard choices to saying.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of that through even with the COVID situations that we're in currently right now, with where life is at, and things are a little bit, a lot more closed down and things like that. But families are spending some more time together, and we've heard, they're like, man, I don't want to go back. And so how do we make sure we don't end up where we are running around all the time? And those are healthy conversations to start having now, right? To what do we want to make a priority?
That's good. And challenge some of those assumptions. This just obviously is a priority. Right. Well, is it? Is it? Do we really have to be that committed to that sport or that event or that? Yeah,
I heard a speaker say to ask yourself at the end of it, did it bring you what you thought it was going to bring you? And so if I'm doing A because I think it's going to bring me, I'm going to be happy at the end of it, or we're going to be closer as a couple, or whatever it may be, and then was that, did the outcome what we were after, actually did we achieve that? And so that's a good way to evaluate some of the things that we have that kind of gets our busyness that leads to drift, right? So kind of controlling those currents, or controlling the things that we can control.
What about marriage counseling? When would you tell a couple they need to go for marriage counseling?
So what is it? They say I do. They do a honeymoon. So what is that? 1 week after, or right? Maybe it's not marriage counseling. You know what? I was going to say, just Family Life actually has a wonderful program called Marriage Mentoring. Okay. And so what that is we love to partner with churches and come alongside churches and work with them on marriage mentoring. And so what marriage mentoring is we'll train couples on how to mentor other couples in their marriage. And these aren't counseling sessions, they're just journeying life together. And so Family Life, I would say, we've done the heavy lifting, and so we've created 14 conversations, and the couples meet once a month. It's about 2 hours, and they go through and you meet with a couple who's 1 or 2 seasons ahead of you in marriage. So what that means is, so Valerie and I, we have teenagers, so we would mentor newlyweds or people that are having just babies. We wouldn't mentor empty nesters, though we can read about it, we can study and help. We haven't lived that life, but we've lived the life of having babies and first marriage. And so we love that initiative with Family Life. And so that can be right off. We know some churches that kind of, they do premarital, they marry the couple, and then they launch them into marriage ministry or marriage mentoring for the first year right away. That's just kind of their standard of what.
So you don't need to be having huge problems in your marriage to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But for counseling, I would say if you're not able to navigate these things well, if you can't have healthy conversations where you're able to hear each other, resolve your differences in a healthy way without it spiraling out of control into unhealthy habits, those kinds of things definitely are red flags that yes, we need somebody else. We need a third party to help guide us through this so that we can, deal with some of the clutter that's lying around in our marriage that we're tripping over.
Yeah. And it could just be a season, right? It could actually just be one thing. Man, we are tripping over. Let's just go back to finances. That's kind of seems to be the theme on the one example. But it's just we're hitting it on all cylinders, but we are tripping over each other when it comes to finances. We just can't get this thing figured out. So maybe just go and seek some help or counseling in finances. There's great resources out there. Come talk to a pastor, and people can point you. So it could just be one thing, right? It doesn't have to be the whole marriage is falling apart. Now we're going to seek counseling. It's just we just kind of keep tripping over our finances, or we kind of keep tripping over, we keep saying yes to everything, but it's not healthy for us. Could you help us navigate and have a healthy conversation?
Yeah, because it's way easier if you can deal with stuff when it's still small. It's way easier to resolve it and to move on versus letting it grow and then spill over into other areas of the relationship.
And that can be good advice, because often one party or the other in a marriage, often the guys, right, don't want to go to a counselor, right? Yeah. And so, but knowing, man, if you deal with this now, you can make some headway in it now, and it won't get crazier, right? And I know, for a lot of people, and maybe guys in particular, it would be we can handle this. We can figure it out, right? We'll do it on our own. But to hear that, I think, is helpful to know, man.
For me, it was, I didn't want to be seen as weak.
Yeah.
And so for me, asking for help was a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
That was messed up thinking.
Right.
Because actually asking for help was a sign of strength.
Right.
Because I realized I can't do this alone. Actually, I'm not meant to do this alone.
Yeah.
And so by reaching out and asking for help, I'm admitting that, hey, I don't know it all, which is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. So again, just another paradigm shift. Now that was my story, right? That was my big struggle, was that I just thought it was a sign of weakness, but it wasn't. I look back now and I'm like, wow, I was so much stronger when I reached out and asked for help.
And I think for so many guys, and sometimes it's the lady in the relationship, it can be both, but when one party is longing for getting help or getting counseling, that kind of thing, and the other one is a little bit resistant, that simple step, if you could, I think the resistant party is kind of like, what does she want? You know, what would make her happy? What would fix this? And I'll tell you, that little step of just saying, yes, I'm willing to go get help. Yes, I'm willing to sit down with somebody else and talk about these things. I mean, that alone, even if there's no solutions in the counseling itself or, you know, no fixes, just the willingness to get help, it speaks volumes and means so much. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we actually were just recently talking with a couple and really had a very hard journey. Yep. And they recently, where she said, I realized it actually wasn't all him.
Right.
I actually realized through the counseling and through the time, like, well, I brought some stuff to the table too. And
because at a quick glance, it could easily look that way, but once she started processing and thinking about it and realizing it, she's like, oh, there was all these other things leading up to it.
For her story. And so he could have been like, oh, I'm going to be seen as the bad person, and because he had done some unhealthy things and that were, but she realized, like, wait a second, I've brought some brokenness to the relationship as well too, and I've got, wow, this has been, I needed this as well. And so it's this.
Yeah, and that was my story too, is realizing that, you know what, I contributed to the brokenness, and to take ownership for what you have brought and done. Yeah.
So dating, being intentional, getting counseling, going to a marriage seminar, right? Getting help, reading a book. Or finding a couple in your life who might do some marriage mentoring or some kind of connecting over marriage to give advice and even just to walk alongside.
Making the relationship a priority. Right? Yeah.
And so that'll help with the drift side of things, which every couple is going to deal with. It's not like you get a free pass. Same with differences, right? Both of those things, differences and drift, no matter who you are. You're going to face those things. So.
And there's different seasons too, right? Like, let's face it, a newborn baby takes a lot of time, right? Like they just do, okay? And our wife, if she stays at home with a newborn baby, and has been dealing with that, and we come home, the last thing she probably wants is her husband draped all over her as well, right? And so again, that's where healthy communication and being able to talk about those things, but also realizing that there's a season that we're in now. So don't allow that season to be the thing that really causes the drift. Realize that you're in these different seasons and going through them, and learn how to navigate. To go back to your canoeing story, there's so many rivers that you can. We've actually started canoeing a little bit last couple of years and had a lot of fun. But man, there's so many rivers you can take to end up in the same spots, and so but take them together and work together in the same canoe and navigate to the same location. Keep your eyes on the destination. Where do you want to be in 1 year? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 20 years? I said to Valerie even yesterday, I said, hey, I signed up to grow old and gray with you. I'm all in. And right? And so, but what is that going to look like? What is 20 years from now, us together? What does that look like? And then let's go after the things to have it look like that. Where do we want to be in 1 year? Let's go after the things that will bring us to that one step closer in 1 year, in 1 month, wherever it may be.
Awesome. Well, I've been married almost 25 years, so we're close with you guys. We made that decision in our dating days that we were going to be intentional, that we weren't going to allow drift to wreck our marriage. So we're 25 years. I think it's the best decision we made in our marriage. We've worked and worked and worked. Boy, we have attended so many marriage seminars, and it's just what we do, right? And but I'll tell you, even with like being so conscious of that and intentional about that, we still have seasons where we've drifted, and we still had seasons where we just didn't, stay on the ball, keep our eye on the shoreline and where we were going, and we've had to sort of wake back up, and we've had seasons where we've gone for marriage counseling and gotten help from others, and other seasons where we've just gone to couples that are further along the path than us, man, we wouldn't have made it without all of those different things, without the date nights, and without the each one of those coming together. We wouldn't be together today. I mean, it's just reality, right? So all of those things matter. And, I think sometimes we look at couples, like my marriage, we're pastors and we've been married 20-some years and we love each other, and we really do. I mean, we're crazy about each other, but we have had to work at it. Yeah. We have had rough waters at times. So I think for couples to know that and hear that and say, you know what, you are going to face differences, you are going to face drift, but if you give her together, if you get on the same team, right, with the differences, and if you be intentional with the drift and you really work at it, you'll find your way. You can navigate those waters.
Congratulate you on that, and to be honest with that, right? Yeah. So often we maybe don't want to share that we have had experienced drift, or we have experienced the hardship of sometimes, or the difficulties that can come of marriage. And so just thank you for being honest. And I'm sure though that you look back now and you're like, wow, all that stuff was worth it to invest in our marriage, to go to these marriage conferences, these continued date nights. And I think you're seeing the fruit in your own lives and in your own marriage for that. So thank you for sharing a little piece of your journey with us here today as well. Sure. Yeah.
Well, we're super thankful for Family Life, and we're excited to have you guys again close by as a resource and a help to our church. And Mariana and I, again, like I was telling you guys earlier, I don't think we put it in this podcast, so I'll just tell you again, like we did dates for the first part of COVID. This is over a year ago now, but we did dates on Saturday mornings where we watched these videos that Family Life was putting on, Together for Good, it was called, right? Yeah. And we worked our way through that, and it was something we looked forward to, and it forced us out of our patterns. Like for us, Saturday mornings was not a normal time to be doing that, but it forced us out of that and made us work on our marriage in a fresh way again. And there we are, 24 years married, and yet so blessed and so helped by your ministry. So thank you. Yeah, good deal. Okay, well, thanks for doing this podcast.
Thank you for having us. Anytime. Just up the road, so we'll gladly come and hang out and visit with you anytime.
Very cool.